peat rose.
Folks, my name is Joe Carroll. I'm looking for Ryland Howard and Bo Leonard. Are y'all here?
We're here.
Okay, and
Right here, Ryland Howard.
Mr. Howard, if y'all will meet me here just a little bit after this is over with, I have a message from Mr. Fligger for y'all.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
My longtime friend Lee Billingsley is going to help hold this thing because it has a tendency to blow over. Can everybody hear me?
No.
No? Well, I'll try.
Talk really loud.
Thank you, Alice. I can hear you good.
Okay, I'll be up there talking then. Alice, come up and talk. Okay, thank you.
If everybody can see this, we'll leave it where it is. If I need to put it up on the table, we can do that too, but what's your pleasure? Is it okay? Can you see it? Most of you here? All right. Okay. This is a geological map. Now, many of you probably have not seen a geological map or understood what it was, so let me kind of explain it to you. Imagine that you're in an airplane or helicopter flying at 20,000 feet looking down on the ground. And let's suppose that every different rock formation has a different color to it. So you're looking down at the ground and you can see a swath of country that's colored blue or yellow or red. Wherever that formation is present on the ground, it's got that color assigned to it.
Speak louder, please.
That's what, this is a geological map. That's what this is. So for example, these belts of country down here are formations on the coastal plain, all dipping down into the Gulf of Mexico, sloping underground. The green area is the Edwards Plateau, and that is a large area that is characterized by one limestone formation called the Edwards limestone. The Edwards limestone gets its name from Edwards County, Edwards Plateau, and so on. This pink area right here is so-called Llano Uplift, or Central Mineral Region. That's the area of old rocks, granite, and so on that you get around Llano, Marble Falls, Mason. Everybody identifying? Taking heads? Yes, understand? Okay, good. Glad you're engaged. These are older rocks. They're younger than this, but Pennsylvania rocks, these are rocks maybe 200 million years age. This Edwards limestone is about 100 million years old. And we know that because the kinds of fossils that we find in it in different areas where they are associated with volcanic ash flows or intrusions that can be age dated by uranium decay. In other words, you can actually measure the age of the igneous rocks and see their relationship to the sedimentary rocks, and therefore we know what the age of the sedimentary rocks are. So we know that this area, green area here, these rocks are about 100 million years old. Now let me ask you to ignore these little orange and pink patches here for the time being. I'll get to those in a minute. So this Edwards Plateau is this kind of green area that's outlined by the black line. Now you're probably wondering what this red line is right there. And that's the Balcones Fault. It's a very large, long, regional fault. What happened was, as the Gulf of Mexico was forming and was bending down this way, the stress that was finally put on it caused this part to move up in relation to this part, which stayed level. So in effect it did that. Okay? And we could date the age of that fault as about 20 to 30 million years ago. So we had created, over a relatively brief period of time, a high plateau adjacent to a coastal plain. Now, porous limestone, when it rains, much of the rainwater seeps into the limestone. It does not run off or runs off a short period before it seeps into the limestone. Now it happens that the base of this limestone rests on a formation which does not transmit water very well. We say, geologically, we say it is impervious or it's tight. So what happens is the water sinks down through the limestone. It gets to the bottom of the limestone. The formation under it doesn't transmit water, so the water begins to accumulate in the bottom of the limestone. Is that clear? Okay. Well, the result of that then is throughout this whole area, there's a widely extensive, thick interval in which is saturated with fresh water. We call that an aquifer. So part of the formation is saturated with water. If any of you have driven, say from Junction to Sonora, or from anywhere across the plateau, you've seen windmills. They're drawing water from that aquifer. And the aquifer is typically anywhere from maybe 150 to 200 feet, to maybe as much as 500 feet deep. In this part of the area right here, the highest part of the plateau, the thickness of that lens of water is anywhere up to about 300 feet of saturated rock. So it's a tremendous subsurface body of fresh water. Now, wherever the erosion has cut back into this limestone formation, and it has cut as deep as the aquifer, the water comes out as a spring. So when we look across here, we're seeing where the river is cut down far enough to intersect that freshwater page. That's what a spring is. Okay? So if you look at in every canyon along the edges of the Edwards Plateau, they're fed by a headwater spring. For example, these are the headwater spring for the Concha. These are the headwater spring for the San Saba. These are the headwater spring for the North and South Llano and Johnson Fork. Headwater spring for the Pedernales, for the Blanco, for the Guadalupe, Sabinal, Frio, East Nueces, West Nueces, Devil's River. So the head of every river in central Texas derives from springs that are draining that giant aquifer. Is that clear? What else? Ignore this other stuff here for the time being. Okay, I think we're ready for the next step. Now, you may be kind of wondering how all that works. So I've prepared a little sketches here to kind of show you this. I want to engage you here and ask you to think with me just for a minute. Imagine a giant round sponge about that thick, and it's like 10 feet across, and it's sitting on a big piece of linoleum or formica, so that any fluid in the sponge can't go further down. All right. Now we're going to put a shower over the top of it, and we're going to just let water spray on the whole sponge. And I want you to think about, as that water accumulates in the bottom part of the sponge, it's going to run out of the edges. So the shape of the lens of water is going to be kind of rounded on the top and flat on the bottom. Is that clear what I'm saying? Right? That's kind of giving you an idea there of what I'm talking about. Okay? Now, one more little imagination. take a really sharp knife or a razor blade, and we're going to cut some V-shaped notches into that sponge. And is it immediately clear to you that wherever those notches come, they're going to penetrate farther into the lens, so you're going to have a spring or fluid flowing out the bottom of those notches. Those are like the canyons on the edge of the Edwards Plateau. Is that clear what I'm saying? Yeah. So you're probably saying, well, why doesn't the water all run out? Well, it does gradually, eventually, except it doesn't find any more rainwater. So it's an ongoing dynamic system in equilibrium. When we have drought, this surface drops a little bit in the ground. When we have a lot of rain, all right? So that's how this aquifer looks. So, if we want to think about the formations that are here, there's this thick Edwards limestone, maybe 500, 600, 700 feet thick. The aquifer in the bottom of it, and resting on the turbidity, which does not transmit water very well. So there's the lens of fresh water and the spring that's coming out of the edge. And if we look regionally, a cross-section, so for example, this could be San Angelo, and there's an intervening plateau and a river valley. Fort McCavitt, there's the San Saba River. There's the Llano River. There's the Guadalupe River. Here's the rainstorms and windmills. So we can see regionally how all that works. Everybody on board? So here we are at 700 Springs. We are sitting here in this grove of pecan trees, looking across the river. Here's the bluff on the other side. The house is sitting about right here. Here's the aquifer, and there's a seam, horizontal seam, because the characteristic of sedimentary rocks in general, and limestone in particular, is what we call stratification, or layers, horizontal layers. And what's happening is that the water is running out, well, let's say this way, a cave has formed where one of those bedding layers, those bedding planes are. It's dissolved out as a place where it's weaker. So if you went up and looked, crawled along there, you find there is one layer, one seam, that's probably about a foot or two high, that reaches way back under the cliff, behind the cliff. And that's we're trying to represent this by that little notch right there. Okay. So that explains why there's such a powerful spring here, is that the water's not seeping out because the crack is reaching back into that body of water. Now, the interesting thing about it is that this layer traces underground all the way back, literally 60 or 80 miles, sloping very gently this way. And this is the primary place where this body of water, the primary place where that aquifer drains and comes to the surface of the ground. That's why it's such a strong spring. There's nothing to interrupt that tremendous body of aquifer that's gently sloping this way. So you're probably wondering, well, is this a big spring? I mean, it looks like a big spring, a lot of water coming out of it, but how does it compare with other springs in Texas? The biggest spring in Texas is the Comal Springs in New Braunfels, and its average flow is 142,500 gallons per minute. That's the biggest spring in Texas. San Marcos Springs is next. San Felipe Springs at Del Rio is next. Barton Springs in Austin is next. This one, the average is 7,300 gallons per minute, and it's the 11th largest spring in Texas. Okay. Now it's unique because these springs are all associated with faults. In other words, for a crack that's gone down into the formation, and the water is coming up the crack and coming out. This spring is not associated with the fault. It's just an interruption in the flow of this huge east sloping aquifer. So, this takes us then to thinking about how all this came to be. The Edwards Plateau, of course, today stands 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 feet above the surrounding coastal plains of the east and south. That uplift began about 30 million years ago. It reached its maximum in what is called the Balcones Fault. The Balcones Fault turns out not to be the beginning of the uplift. It turns out to be the end of the uplift. So it was warping up and then snapped, so to speak. That's about 30 million years ago. And the Edwards limestone that we see today, that's also present at the top of the plateau, say between Junction, Sonora, Arizona, not more than about maybe 1,000, 1,500 feet of sedimentary rock covered that in the intervening 20 or 30 or 40 million years. And then after that, it eroded away. Balcones faulting began about 20 million years ago. About 10 million years ago, all of the overlying rock had been removed by erosion. And now we were cutting down through the Edwards limestone down into the older rocks. And at the present time, we can look back and sort of estimate that something like 9,000 cubic miles of rock have been removed. I'll show you this. So remember that at one time the Edwards Plateau reached all the way down to here. And so in the intervening 30 million years, 20 million years, all of this has been eroded away. And it will continue to erode back in this direction. So we can project maybe 30 or 40 or 50 million years from now, the plateau will have been completely eroded away by these rivers that cut back into it.
Then what happened?
Reminds me of a story when I was a young geologist working in San Saba County. I was looking at a place where the ancient rocks had been eroded and the younger rocks had come across on top of it. And I was looking at this road cut, and this rancher stopped by and he said, what are you seeing here? What is of interest? And I tried to explain about the oceans, seas coming in and depositing sediment, and the land being uplifted, and another transgression came across. And he said, you say that the sea's been here 3 times in geologic history. I said, yeah. He said, if you tell me when it's coming again, I can sell my ranch. Okay. I want to talk very briefly now about, shift gears and talk a little bit about history. Not long, just a little bit. It's important to understand that where you had permanent water, you had what was essential for the early frontier settlers to locate. And after the Civil War, you had basically European settlers that had a European Christian background began to settle from here going west. And of course what they did was to follow these rivers back up, because there they had alluvial soils to plant their corn patch in and kitchen gardens, and they had a permanent source of water. And usually there was some alluvial soils in the bottom. So the presence of water was absolutely essential. Now, think about an area in which there is no water. It's clear that those are the areas that are wilderness. They are the areas where people are civilized people, which are not living. Well, those are the areas that were frequented by Indians raiding from Mexico. There were Indians from North America, well, from Texas, many of them, had been run out by the state of Texas. They came to Mexico and settled, and they were Indians from Oklahoma that were settlements in these valleys. So this was an area where whenever you had the plateau itself impinging closely on stream valleys, there you had the juxtaposition of wilderness to civilization. That's where the early Indian race were. So the history of every one of these areas defined into through the 1870s into the early 1880s were where your last Indian race is. And these were Indians mostly until about 1875 from Oklahoma, where it's in Indian territory. This was primarily Comanche and Kiowa. And from Mexican Indians living in Mexico and raiding into this area here. So if you look at the area of the South Llano, North Llano Delta, you'll see that more than any of these other streams represented an incursion into the heart of this waterless river. So you've got the imposition of lawlessness and settlement and civilization. So as you can imagine, this area had a very colorful history. First of all, a lot of Indian raids and settlements. The U.S. Army began to get both the Mexican Indians and the northern Plains Indians under control, and a lot of then mostly Scotch-Irish settlers came in, including a lot of outlaws. They were run out of East Texas after Reconstruction. So we had a very violent past here, and up and down the South Llano Valley was their primary concentration. There were a few of this group that were located a little farther east in eastern Kimball County, but most of them were along the South Llano. And they were the members of the Dublin family and the Potter family, and all of them were itinerants. Most of them were squatters, and there was a period from about 1873 until 1882 where that contingent for a while actually took over the county government, and then gradually the rangers came in and citizens rallied around them. It took about a total of maybe 6 or 7 years to overcome this basically a tribal criminal mafia type of organization. And they were stealing cattle and horses and trading them in Mexico, and they were robbing stagecoaches and one thing and another, and a very colorful history. I wrote a book about it a few years ago.
A wonderful book.
Well, you're very kind to say so.
The title of?
The name of it is The Reckoning.
The Reckoning.
The Reckoning. The Triumph of Order on the Texas Outlaw Frontier. Texas Tech Press published it. I think there are a few copies left, but it's just about out of print. In any case, I don't want to bore you with a lot of details, but we'll leave this up. The little orange thing shows you where the principal players live. The Peg Leg Crossing was where most of the stage robberies occurred. I probably should have oriented you a little better. San Angelo, San Antonio, Austin, Fredericksburg. Oh, this was the Dodge City cattle trade, and it went up from around sort of southwestern Texas by about Bandera, crossed over into the valley of the Guadalupe, and over the plateau, came out at Gates Crossing of the Llano, there near London. Everybody know where London, Texas is? Came out there. Then went on across another little spur, across the San Sabet Peg Leg Crossing, and then went on up north through the Cow Gap at Brady. I don't know about Brady, where Brady is. Just west of Brady, there's a gap in the plateau. So the geology of the area has had a profound influence on the history of settlement, where people lived, and a lot of the conflict that took place. By 1882, the frontier was closed. Primary reasons were, number one, barbed wire, let people control their cattle. Percussion drilling, cable tool drilling on the plateau, which let people drill wells down and tap into that aquifer, so that they now have permanent water for their livestock and for their own homesteads. And the railroad, which by 1882 you had a railroad coming this Texas Pacific, and people no longer needed to drive their cattle. They could put them on the railroad. They no longer needed stagecoaches because you could take the railroad. So those events in that brief period from 1875 and 1882 had a profound effect on the change from a frontier society to a beginning to be an orderly, civilized society. And that period also marked the end of the lawless period and the beginning of county organization, orderly law enforcement, and so on. Thank you for your attention.
Know that railroads civilized the country. Kimball County has never had a railroad.
There's a connection there. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Yeah, yes, sir. Peg Leg Crossing on the San Saba River, about 10 miles east of Lenore. And the county road crossing right there, about a mile from the old Peg Leg Station. I think I done told you all I know.
We always like to announce that the places that are represented here today, and you heard a while ago something about the Taylor Ranch on Paint Creek. We have a Taylor descendant with us today, Brenda Wade and her husband Jack from Pelham, Alabama. Would you like to say a few words, Brenda, wherever you are? There you are.
Very nice to be here today. I felt like I needed to be here. My grandmother, she was a Turner who lived down the road, and my grandfather, that was a Taylor, spent their honeymoon here November 12th, 1910. So I just wanted to come. I had lived with her a lot, and I always saw pictures hanging up the bed of these springs. All my life I saw that picture. And one day she said, that's where we spent our honeymoon. So I thought I would love to go see that. So this was a special trip for us. We wanted to come last year and was not able, and I'm glad we didn't because we had bad weather. But it's quite an honor to be here.
Thanks. Good luck. We have Bryan, Texas. If you raise your hand as I call out home. Atkins, Texas. Llano, Texas. Rosenberg, Spring Branch, Conroe, Lake Jackson, Kerrville, Harper, Llano, Italy, Scottsville, San Angelo, Fredericksburg, Burnett, did I say Kerrville, Bluffton, Crosby, San Angelo, Austin, Center Point, Kingsland, Bandera, Menard, Dripping Springs, Midlothian, San Antonio, Lakey, Center Point. We have someone from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Kyle, Texas, Midland, Dripping Springs, and I may repeat this, Big Spring, somebody's on the full-time rivers. Full-time RVer. Sabinal, Cedar Hill, Arlington, London, Mason, Wimberley, Liberty Hill, and we have somebody from Roosevelt that we put down. Thank y'all for being here. Just enjoy. Thank you. Oh, if you haven't registered, please do so.
How many are registered?